Good morning, dear friends. Welcome. Unlike last time, I'm going to hit mute all because I hear myself too many times. Here, 1 second. Unlike last time we met, we are now in the month of Elul. It is Monday, Beis Elul. We are still in the tail end of August 29th, 2022, Tafshin Pei Beis. And we're here to study the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. Presently, Mesechet Shabbat, the 19th chapter, Perek Eliezer, the Mila, and we are on page 132. Kuf Lamed Beis. Who would imagine? Who could imagine that? And so the broad topic of discussion has been circumcision on Shabbos. The act of circumcision 100% can and is done on Shabbos. The question that we've been previously asking was, Hechsher mitzvah, all the steps that are not the act of the circumcision, but facilitate and bring to the bris, can those be done? And of course, that was the subject of a big, exhaustive machlokes. Rabbi Eliezer saying, yeah, Hechsher mitzvah, by bris and many other instances, absolutely permissible, whereas the Chachamim less inclined or not inclined to accept that premise. We reviewed all different mitzvahs, holiday-oriented mitzvahs, shofar, matzah, lulav, esrig, oimer, shnei halachem, and each one of those we reviewed how they have distinguishing and unique aspects that set them apart from other mitzvot. And then at long last, on Friday, we began reviewing the mitzvah of Mila itself. We talked about what sets the mitzvah of Mila apart from other mitzvahs. We showed the verse. We even had a chance to discuss, at least briefly, Halacha l'Moshe Missinai story. And that's approximately where we are holding. So we've shared the screen. And let's just get everything to be just so. Hold on. We'll just here we'll see the final lines of last week and then we'll get started. Again, a reminder, I hit mute all before I started talking because I was hearing some echoes, but please unmute for questions, comments, dissent, all which makes this discussion a most valuable enterprise. I should just say before we start that on Shabbos, here are we? On Shabbos, which was Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, so I had something I planned on saying, but then I opened up a sefer on Shabbos Day, which was actually a collection of the Rebbe's talks from 1969. And at random, I was looking in I flipped to a page, and I discovered something that I didn't know, because I wasn't born yet, but in 1969. In the summer of 1969, that is when the United States landed someone on the moon for the first time. It was actually, according to the Hebrew calendar, I think it was the 6th of believe it or not. Was it June? No, it must have been July. Who knows the exact dates? Mark, you know the dates we landed on the moon? July 19th.
20th.
July 19th. We have a machlokes, July 19th, July 20th.
It's the 20th.
The 20th? Okay, July 20th.
But it was at night, so.
Oh, it was at nighttime. So maybe it depends where you were in the
evening.
If you were in China, maybe it was July. No.
Let's see. I can look up on my luach here.
Anyway, so on Shabbos, I discovered, or I see this, and basically the Rebbe, very interestingly, obviously the entire world and certainly anyone in America who was up to date, and even very much so the Jewish community, was incredibly preoccupied and excited by this piece of information, by this exciting news, historic event. And you can kind of read between the lines that the crowd in Shul in 770 and the Rebbe were also very preoccupied by this exciting news. And the Rebbe referenced a variety of lessons and Torah perspectives on the moon landing. And when it comes to around Rosh Chodesh Elul, the Rebbe found a number of parallels to the themes of the project.
It was hay, but I guess this was night. It would have been Vav Elul. I mean, Vav.
Those hay of. Okay, very interesting.
Yeah, because the 20th was hay, but of course it was the night in the evening, so then it would have already been Vav.
So, and so just one point, the Rebbe was saying how people were very excited that NASA spent billions of dollars and probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of man hours to travel a journey of many. Mark, help me out. What's the distance between the moon and the Earth, or what's the average distance?
And it was at 250,000 miles.
How many?
I think it's 250,000. I can
approximately 250,000 miles. That's a very vast distance, and it's not just a distance of space, and not just a distance, but it's also a distance of very, very different kinds of environments, which naturally humanity until that point didn't have the capacity to do so. And the way we know it's not an easy thing, an easy task to do, is that it really wasn't replicated, certainly not in recent times, very often. And so the Rebbe says that's very exciting, but think about the vastness of the journey of a soul on the Shema from
the exact 239,000 about
239,000.
Yeah, 250 was pretty close.
Just think about the vastness of the descent of the neshama from under the kisei hakavod itself throughout all universe and time and space to arrive at the exact moment that Hashem chose to put a neshama on this planet. And just like the mission to the moon, there were very important objectives, and it was worth spending billions of dollars and millions of people's hours of their life and attention. Well, could you imagine what kind of investment Hashem makes to assure that a neshama arrives on this earth to be part of this essential mission to bring the world to in a more ideal state? And so the Rebbe was saying that if that catches your imagination, we should consider the value that every one of us represent in this broader, much longer time period mission. So, anyways, something interesting to chew on during davening.
They're starting the moon program again. The mission, they had to postpone it, but they were supposed to send a rocket, an unmanned rocket that was going to simulate the whole moon.
Exactly. So I spoke about that. I just encountered this in the Sefer, and I shared it.
That's what got this going.
I thought it was interesting, but then someone told me actually that they're trying to send an unmanned rocket to the moon as we speak. And Mark, you said it finally launched?
No, it didn't launch. It's postponed till Friday.
Yeah, postponed again.
They had a problem with the engine, and they had to let it wind.
Well, anyway, so there you have it. Something about this time. I don't know what the Soviet well, no, I don't know if there are any rabbis that were given an opportunity to give a drasha, but
back then, probably not.
Dr. Hammer, you're muted. You're gonna say something?
There are many other times that the Rebbe talked about the local, not local, the news or things that were happening, whether it be wars or anything.
Yeah, the Rebbe somewhat frequently would reference current events, especially if they intersected with Eretz Yisrael or Jewish interest, or if they captured the attention of people, and the Rebbe felt that it would be a way to get a point home and also get people's attention back to
But he didn't go down like some other rabbis to giving World Series scores, in the middle of.
No, the Rebbe did not generally talk about sports. However, the Rebbe famously did talk a good bit about Sandy Koufax. When he
didn't pitch on him.
When he didn't pitch, the Rebbe spoke about that, and there were
Rabbi.
Yes.
There's also the wonderful example that the rabbi gave the kid about baseball. Are you a spectator or a player? Wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. So, anyways, but coming back to our Gemara, for a moment.
Back to earth.
Back to just for a moment. So now I told you we'll read the final lines. We've now come back to the essential point, which is to understand the machlokes Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim about doing a bris on Shabbos and the preparatory facilitating steps on Shabbos or not. So ad kan like pligi rabbanan alei elo b'machshirei mila. The whole machlokes only it was in regards to prep the things that were not the act of circumcision, but preparing for circumcision. Avo mila gufei, when it comes to the actual bris, divrei hakol doicha Shabbos. Everyone agrees that the act of the circumcision is doicha Shabbos. Mi nalon, the Gemara asks, and I know we read this on Friday, I'm just setting us up. Mi nalon, how do we know this? Amar Ula. Ula tells us, how does everybody know you do a bris on Shabbos? Halacha. It is a halacha l'Moshe Sinai.
I have a
Part
different
of
point.
an oral tradition that was from the beginning of time of the Matan Torah from Moshe Rabbeinu. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Similarly, Rabbi Yitzchak said, halacha. It is halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Just before we continue,
I have a, to me,
do you want to talk about the word halacha or something else?
no, the Mila Gufa.
Okay, go ahead.
If the Mila itself is Docha Shabbos, then automatically you need, in order to do the Mila, you need the Machshira. So why is it even a question?
Well, we're going to see, but the machshirim need to be prepared, could be prepared before Shabbos.
Yeah,
Let's
but
say
if
you
they
can only do a
weren't,
bris.
the whole point is if they weren't.
Yeah, they
So-
weren't, but they could have been. And so the question is, if you forgot, can you do a bris? Or could you make the knife? And that's what we're saying. No. According to the Chachamim, although you're allowed to do the cut, you're not, if you fail to do the other steps that were necessary, you forgot to get the baby, you forgot to get a knife, you forgot to other parts of the bris, well, then you might have to, or you would not be allowed to do those on Shabbos. That's what the Chachamim, and that's what the halacha actually is, that you have to, you can't create a knife on Shabbos or do other acts of malacha that are not essential to be done bo bayom. Dr. Hammer?
Is it possible to read further into it? And let's say you're talking about a knife, okay? So you're saying you can't make a knife on Shabbos. Could somebody say that, okay, the Moel didn't have his knife. He forgot to bring his knife. But there is another knife available, which is not his knife, which he's never used, but which could do the job.
I don't know exactly what the cutoff is, meaning I don't know exactly. Maybe you like that cutoff?
Yeah, it won't be long now. Yeah.
Does it have to be a meat knife or a dairy knife?
No, I'm serious. So,
no, it's a good question. It's
when
a
you're
good
talking
question.
about things ancillary to doing the bris, you forgot. I'm not talking about you forgot the bagels. We're talking about you forgot that the knife is not there, and you can't make another knife. But I'm saying it's a serious question. Is it possible to?
So I don't know exactly. If there's another knife, are you asking according to Rabbi Eliezer?
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying. You're asking according to Rabbi Eliezer, who does allow it.
Yeah.
Would he allow it even in a case where it's not necessary? That's a good question. Or is it only when you forgot, when you had no other choice? That's a good question.
Right.
I in the moment I don't know. Let's keep an eye out. Let's see if we can get it.
The basic question, I guess, is how far can you go?
Right. That's a good question. From earlier in the Gemara, initially my impression was that he was incredibly permissive. It sounds like lechatchila you could carry, you don't have to have the knife available. So maybe he would say lechatchila you could fashion a knife, but it's a good question. I don't have I'm not 100% certain. Doctor's asking, let's say the guy has a knife, but it's not his own knife, or he wants to make another knife. And that's a good question. Let's keep our eyes out. Let's see if there are any additional clues to that matter. I will warn you, or I'll alert you, I should say, that apparently the psak is not in accordance to Rabbi Eliezer. The psak is in accordance to Chachamim. So l'maisa, we're not, the machshirei mila is not Doicha Shabbos. So this would all be academic. It's all more or less academic as it pertains to mila and Shabbos in 2022. But
Rabbi, you can't use an ordinary knife.
I'm sorry?
You can't use an ordinary knife. What he used was a scalpel.
Well, which
was like a
there was
blade.
a specific
A knife would rip.
Again, I don't know if once upon a time things were a little more fluid or different, but certainly today the Mohalim have a specific kind of or specific set of medical instruments that are used for the circumcision that are distinctly, or at least somewhat distinctly, Mila specific. Was it once upon a time different? I don't know. If anyone's been to a Jewish library museum, you go to museum, you go to Rome or to whatever, among the Jewish artifacts, it's likely that they would have on display a Mohel's kit, a bris kit. I don't remember now, like exactly, but it feels like that's the kind of thing that you would find in these kind of the Israel Museum. I'm sure you have like instances of because they have wonderful exhibits of what the different Jewish cultural items and cultural dress and shul decor. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was plenty of information about a Mohel's Ismail. Again, the word Ismail here in the Steinsaltz translates as a scalpel. As you may recall, we saw in the Ben Yehoyada that the word Ismail Kabbalistically is precisely the right word to describe the Mohel instrument, the Mila instrument, and Azmal. Remember that? But anyways, let's see the Gemara a little further because there's going to be some discussion. The discussion is going to be if it is true that the origin, the source for Mila is a halacha l'maisha misinai or not. So initially, again, just to set things up, and let's move forward. There's a machlokes about hechsher mitzvah. Everybody agrees that you could do a bris on Shabbos. How do we know? Ula and Rabbi Yitzchak say it is a halacha l'maisha misinai. Meisvei. Now we're going to have a challenge to this notion. Again, this is another issue that we discuss frequently, and it's important to know. How do we actually know that Shabbos is pushed aside for life-saving purposes? To save a life, we are doiche Shabbos. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said, simple. Ma'amila. He uses a Kal v'chomer. We translate it as a 40-yori, but to be honest, 40-yori and Kal v'chomer, I think, are in the same company, unless you've been to law school or some other place where they talk about Latin rules of logic. Actually, I may be wrong. Anyone here in college talked about a 40-yori? Certainly in rabbinic college they do. Anyways, okay. A Kal v'chomer. Yes.
Rabbi, I have an image here of a biblical knife used with a moil.
How did you search? What were the search terms?
Biblical knife used in circumcision.
Depends when.
I'll try to Google and
It's a
put up
big
on
knife.
the screen. We have to. I'm sorry.
It's a big knife. It's a big knife.
Depending on who put that image up, it either is or isn't.
And when?
No, the reason why I'm hesitant to just do a Google search is depending on if it is a anti-Mila advocate or something. There's a lot of probably interesting information out there. So we'll take a look later and we'll see if we can uncover. All right, Minayin Lamila. I'm sorry, Minayin L'Pikuach Nefesh Shaleches Shabbos. How do we know the Brisa says that? The Brisa doesn't say does Pikuach Nefesh push off Shabbos. We know that as a matter of fact, but what is the origin? Elazar ben Azariah uses a Kal v'chomer. He uses one of the instruments of analysis that's used in the Torah. Ma'mila shi'achas meivarav shel adam daiches Shabbos, just like circumcision, which only is a melacha for one organ, one part of the body, and we're push off Shabbos. Kal v'chomer. L'pikuach nefesh daiches Shabbos, for sure. For saving, for making available the entire body to do mitzvahs. That's my interpretation. We're doiche es Shabbos. Because again, look, there's a bris that's done. There's a mitzvah that's done with the bris. That brings one part of the body in compliance to do Torah mitzvahs. If a person chas v'shalom passes, there is no mitzvah that they can do. So by saving their life, we are enabling full a mitzvah with every part of the being. Let's see how Rabbi Steinsaltz translates it. Let's see if he says it differently than me. Just a circumcision which pertains to one person's limb overrides Shabbos. All the more so, it is a fortiori inference as saving a life, which is a mitzvah that pertains to the entire. Oh, okay, so he says it better. I'll defer to Rabbi Steinsaltz. We know it's a mitzvah to save a life. And to save a life is a mitzvah that encompasses the entire being. That's a whole lot better and more comforting than my interpretation. Okay. You might think, actually, no. The only way we know that we say we do a bris is halacha mashma Sinai. That's a problem. Because although it is common to use the kal v'chomer tool in biblical analysis to infer a halachic fact from one mitzvah or one scenario to the other, we cannot use a kal v'chomer if the original source is a halacha l'mashma Sinai. Therefore, we must assume that a kal v'chomer, we must assume that the original source that a bris can be done on Shabbos is not a halacha l'mashma Sinai. Again, we have a brisa which uses a kal v'chomer inference from bris. But we'd only be able to make a kal v'chomer if bris itself had a biblical pasuk telling us that it could be done on Shabbos, not a oral tradition dating back to Moshe Rabbeinu. How do we know this? Vatanya Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Akiva Etzem Kisayir Halacha Revi is Dam Kal V'Chomer Ve'Ein Done in Kal V'Chomer Halacha. Long story short, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says you cannot use the formula of a Kal V'Chomer if an original halachic fact is a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. This is a different discussion, which for the moment let's just pass over and use one line. Ein done kal v'chomer me'halacha. This has to do with the laws of a nazir. If a nazir becomes in contact with a corpse or a part of a corpse, but let's avoid going down that rabbit hole just for a moment. Although certainly it's worthy of study, but let's put it aside for a moment. So here we see, this is the punchline. The Tosefah explicitly states that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah himself derives a kal v'chomer from the halacha of circumcision on Shabbos. It's clear, therefore, that the origin is not from halacha l'Moshe Sinai. How does Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah know that you are allowed to push aside Shabbos to do a bris, which must be the case? Asya ois. He uses the word ois in the discussion of circumcision. Let's read Rashi for a moment. Asya ois. B'Shabbos ksiv, in the context of Shabbos, it says ki ois hi beini, right? That the Shabbos is a sign between man and Hashem, or the Jewish people and Hashem. Uvemila ksiv, and in the context of the bris, it says v'haya le'ois bris. The circumcision will be a sign of a covenant. Malahal on Shabbos, Afkan Shabbos. So just like the word ois of Shabbos, of course, happens on Shabbos, well, therefore we know that the other ois can also occur on Shabbos, the ois of bris. It's based on a word in the Torah, and that's how we know that we're pushed aside Shabbos in the context of circumcision.
Rabbi,
is it about ois, or is it about some? So
right.
why don't we first make sure we understand what it is, and then we'll ask further clarifying questions. So let's once again read Rabbi Steinsaltz, and then please hold on to your question. This halacha law is derived by a verbal analogy of the word ois, which appears in the context of bris. You shall circumcise in the flesh of your foreskin. It shall be a sign and a covenant between me and you. There's a sign that appears regarding Shabbos. You shall keep Shabbos oisi b'nei u'b'nei oisi le'olam. From this verbal analogy, we could derive that bris, which is a sign, happens on Shabbos. The Gemara is not done with this thought process. The Gemara is going to bring a challenge. But Rebero, what did you want to ask?
So it's my usual question. How many times does the word ois appear in the Torah? And why do we at this point say it when somebody else might find another pasuk?
So instead of asking that question, which is a good one, let's see if the Gemara asked that question.
Yeah, maybe we should be putting on tefillin on Shabbos.
Oh, okay, good, great, exactly. So now let's see. Your questions are good questions, but they're so good the Gemara itself is going to address it in a seamless and fluid way. So let's see the Gemara, and then we'll revisit the question because it certainly is a good one. Elomeata. So Dr. Hammer and Rebero both were mechavin to a good question. Hold on a second. Are you telling me every time you see the word ice, a mitzvah is an ice? It could be done on Shabbos. Elomeata tefillin ice. Tefillin is also called an ice.
I didn't see it.
You were mechavin. It was not on the screen. You were mechavin correctly. And Rebero too. Let's see the pasuk inside. This is somewhat familiar. This is in one of the 4 passages that describe tefillin. This is the passage that we call Vahaya. No, we call it Kadesh. Kadesh Ligo Bechar. So this is a passage that's written in the tefillin. It's also read by certain Jews every day. It's printed in the Chabad Siddur at the close of the morning davening. And here it says, Bigat Levincha, speak to your son. This was said right around in the Exodus. And then it says, V'haya lechale ice, al yadcha, should be a sign on your hand, l'zikar beinecha, and a reminder between your eyes. So basically, we have a reference to the mitzvah of tefillin, calling it an ice. Tefillin is an ice. Then we have another verse, we say again, so the two psukim, the 2 parshiyos of Vahaya Kiviyacha and Kadesh Li, both reference tefillin. And here, and I guess this is really the primary verse, twice we see that the tefillin is called an ice.
Al Yadecha, Al Yadcha.
I'm sorry?
Nothing. Okay.
Al Yadcha, yeah. By the way, this verse is also one of the origins that a lefty puts the tefillin on the right hand, and a righty puts on the left hand. Because Yadcha, there's a drush as Yad Keha, the weaker hand. But anyways, for our purposes, tefillin is called an ice. Let's read Rashi. Ihach Zer Shava the ice, Ha'amura b'Shabbos, Nemra b'Sinai, Lidaresh Ateva Zula Drasha Nemra Ligmar Minal Nami L'Tefillin. We have a long-standing established Zera Shava that ice tells us it could be done on Shabbos. Well, tefillin should also be able to be done on Shabbos. Now, we know as a matter of fact that in our Jewish practice, today and all times, tefillin was not worn on Shabbos. As a matter of fact, we say that one of the reasons we don't need to wear tefillin on Shabbos is because tefillin is an ice, but the whole fact that we're experiencing Shabbos is an ice. And so being that Shabbos is a sign, a reminder of our connection to Hashem, a reminder of our Creator, a reminder of Yitzias Mitzrayim, we do not need the ice of tefillin. And so this is a very good way to reject the use of the word ice as a Gzeira Shava to teach us that you put on tefillin. And so, Rebero, you were mamish mechavin precisely to the question and to the challenge of the Gemara. Now, you asked the question, how many times does it use the word ice? Does anybody know? Are there other mitzvahs that we also use the word ice? I think it's pretty restricted to tefillin, Shabbos, and Milah. But if there would be another context, we would have a similar question. But ultimately, the question is not so relevant because the Gemara itself embraces Rebero, your question, and Dr. Hammer's question, and therefore rejects this assertion. Okay, there are some questions here. For example, there's a machlokes in Menachos, which we are not learning now, but we will learn in Mitzvah Hashem. And there's an exhaustive discussion about tefillin and mezuzahs and these kind of things. What exactly is the reason we don't wear tefillin? Is it prohibited? Is Shabbos considered as tefillin? And it has some bearings on Shabbos. What do you do if you have a pair of tefillin that you need to move, which we did discuss before? But let's go on. The Gemara answers, Rebero, you stumped the rabbi. The Gemara, the commenter on the Gemara is stumped, and therefore we need to revise the Gzeira Shava that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is going to use. Ela Asya, bris. We're going to use a different Gzeira Shava. We'll use the word bris. Let's see. Hahuda ice loy nemer b'Sinai. the story of Ice was not given at Sinai. The Ein Adam Don Gzeir Shava Me'atzmai. And a person cannot invent a Gzeir Shava that does not go back in tradition, which is actually another answer or facet of Rebel's question. Rebel asked, hold on, and we'll use bris or ice, we'll apply it to other places where the word ice is used. So our Gemara asserts, actually, there is no such Gzeir Shava as ice, and you're not allowed to invent it on your own. It has to be part of the part of the oral tradition. Rashi, Asya bris, Hahuda ice, loy number Sinai ve'ein adam dang Gzeir Shava. Elahach, the bris. We have a Gzeir Shava of bris, which originated in the onset of Jewish tradition. By the bris is called the bris. Of a Shabbas Ksiv, bris, l'dairaisam bris aylam. Hold on. Here. Achas Shabsosai Tishmoiru. Observe Shabbos, ki ois he beini u'beinechem. It is a sign between me and between you, l'doyer seichem for all generations. Ladas ki ani Hashem mikadishchem u'shmartem es Shabbos. Keep Shabbos, ki kodesh ilachem. It's holy for you. Mechalel ma'isumas k'loisem malachem nechus hanefesh mekar mal sheishus yom ta ye'asem malacha v'yom ashri Shabbos Shabbos and kodesh Hashem. This should be familiar. We read this in Kiddush, right? So this is one of the many instances, one of the many places where the Torah discusses Shabbos, and here we see that it's described as a bris olam. Let's read Rabbi Steinsaltz's explanation. We have a different verbal analogy from bris. It says the bris will be a covenant, and the word covenant is around Shabbos. Is the Gemara gonna accept this? Gadol. If that's so, we have a problem. Why? Because gadol, what if the person who's being circumcised is a gadol, is an adult? Rashi, ben shloish asrei, dava mitzvah shloi bizmano. Person is having a bris, a belated bris. We'll see in a moment why.
Rabbi, but we had the general principle. Once the bris is delayed, you don't have to do it on Shabbos.
But now we are, Rebbe, hold on, I want to remind you, now we're learning the Gemara, we're going through the building blocks. So we have to kind of set aside what we know, because a lot of what we know is going to be born out of or influenced by this conversation. So the Gemara is now, in other words, I didn't say this, but the Gemara kind of says, let's forget everything we know. And let's go to let's start from the top. How do I know that bris is doicha Shabbos? So first we said it's a halacha l'mishmei Sinai, and the Gemara rejected it. And so now we're kind of probing and figuring out what might have been the origin to this halacha. Interestingly enough, from our Gemara, it's clear that the halacha, the practice was known, but we want to also tie down and be sure that we have clear the exact origin in practice. And how is this possible? Because bris was being done from the beginning of time. And so the people knew the halacha, but as the Chachamim are studying, they're essentially reaching back to the earlier generation. They want to make sure that they don't just know the practice, but we have the fullness of the source and the reason behind it. And that's the exercise that our Gemara is entertaining. So let's just read this one more time. Gadol, an adult, who's having a bris at 13, let's say. It uses the word bris. Based on what you're saying, that bris tells us that bris, mila, pushes is done on Shabbos. Well, I'll use the same word bris to tell me that a late bris is also done on Shabbos. Lidchei Shabbos. Now, where do we find that a not timely bris is also called a bris? Again, we use the word bris as a code word for circumcision. But in the Torah, it's referred to as mila, right? So how do I know that the mila that's not on time is also called a bris? Let's read Rashi. Very simple. It says like this: V'aro zachar asher lo yimo, an adult who will not undergo a circumcision. Again, this is in Gracious, where Hashem is telling Avram to circumcise his people. No, why don't we read the whole thing? Right? This is in the end of Lech Lecha. Vayhi Avram ben Tishim Shana v'Teisha Shanim. He was 99 years old. Vayira Hashem al Avram. Vayirma Lavani Kel Shaka Yisaf Lafani. Tell him, go before me and be Tobim. Let's ignore some of the translations here. The etna brisi b'nei v'necha, I'll place my covenant with you. V'arba yischamoid ma'oid, and I'll make you many, multiply. V'yipol avram panav v'yidaber itach kim leimar. And Hashem says, Ach hine brisi itach v'yisal avram goyim. We're going to have a covenant with you. V'lo yikare oid shemcha Avram. You'll no longer be called Avram. V'yishemcha Abraham. K'avram goyim nesaticha. V'freisi yischamoid ma'oid nesatil. And I'll make you many, and I'll establish the covenant between me and you, and your children and me, and you'll get the land. But observe my covenant. Zois Brisi. What is the covenant I'm talking about? Asher tishmeru beini u'beinechem v'mizrach achrecha yiboy lechem kol zachar. It's going to be in the act of circumcision. So first of all, a few things that we discussed, but now we see it inside over here. We said that there's 13 words bris. Well, now look, go back to the beginning over here, and if we'll count, and actually the Rambam does this, you will find that there are 13 times the word bris. We also find that Hashem is tying up a lot of the wonderful promises that he's giving Avram. It's tied up and connected to a bris, a covenant. And part of that covenant, or an essential part of that covenant, is the bris. Reberel. Someone asked the question, how do we know that the circumcision is in the place that it is? Well, Himoy Lechem Kol Zachar, circumcise the males. So the commentaries, maybe even Rashi over here, say that the circumcision is going to occur in a place that is distinct between males and females.
That's Alan's question.
It was Alan's question. I'm sorry, Alan's question. I'm sorry.
I
knew it was a Canadian pharmacist.
Deep. I didn't go that deep.
I knew it was a Canadian pharmacist. I'm sorry, I mixed up. So anyways, we may yet even see it in the Gemara. So, but the point that I was really getting to, Jewish people should always circumcise their 8-day-old child. Any member of your family, not only your household, even people that are acquired and part of your household would also get a circumcision. And here is the pasuk that we're talking about here. The Arel Zachar, a male who is in Arel does not have a bris. Asher lo yimal psar lasei, that will not have a bris. The nichrisa hanefesh ahi me'ameha, this person will be cut off from his people as brisi hafer, he has broken the covenant. So it starts many psukim. Hashem promises Avram wonderful things. He says there's going to be a covenant between me and you, me and your children, etc., etc. It's going to be with the circumcision. And then he says that you got to do it. And a person that doesn't has karis. Dr. Hammer, go ahead.
Rabbi.
Yeah,
Hold on, Dr. Hammer was in the.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I'm reading this, and I'm saying, if a male who is uncircumcised fails to circumcise flesh of his foreskin, that person shall be cut off from kin. He has broken my covenant. Okay. Now let's remember, we are doing something to an 8-day-old newborn.
Correct.
And then we're holding him responsible somehow. This person who is not circumcised is, we don't accept him. So something very strange and inconsistent and illogical about, and it's an argument that many people, it's not a good argument.
Well, your question is an important question because it's leading up to our Gemara. If you remember, our Gemara said over here, an adult, and we're referencing this very pasuk. So we're not talking about consequences to a child. An 8-day-old or a 9-day-old child can't say, "Hey, Dad, you didn't give me a bris yesterday. Come on." So we're not talking about a child. We're talking about when a person becomes an adult. If the parent who was initially responsible to give the bris failed to do so, or if the child is an orphan, or the child they live in a place where there is no bris, then as an adult, he becomes responsible to give himself a circumcision. And all the caveats that always apply. there are people that were born and never knew they were Jewish or never knew they had the opportunity. So of course, all those caveats would apply here too. But a person who knows or becomes aware is a descendant of Avram should get themselves a bris. And there's very powerful words of blessing and words of consequence attached to the significance of a bris milah.
But the other one who isn't aware, but was circumcised, okay.
You're saying it's not fair to reward a person who had no role in circumcising
right.
themselves.
That's right. Or to punish. Or to punish.
Yeah, well, initially, I think consequent reward and punishment is actually for the parents. And think back to the story of Moshe Rabbeinu,
Okay.
right? Moshe doesn't circumcise his child as a result of an agreement, according to the Medrash, between Yisro and Moshe, right? And yet, as he's going on the way to Mitzrayim, he almost is killed because he didn't circumcise his child. And Tzipporah is the heroine. Tzipporah is the one who gets up and circumcises the son, not with a metal knife, but with a flint stone, which is interesting. Although I guess that was probably the implement of choice in those days. But we see that, yeah, the consequence is certainly initially to the parents.
Right.
Okay.
Rabbi,
Now, hold on. Rabbi Allen, now that we're here, now that you're here, and Rabbi reminded me it was your question. So you look at this pasuk again. This is the pasuk that we're discussing just for a moment, but it's good for us, for me anyways. The Gemara talks about a pasuk. It's always good to really see the pasuk and not just take the Gemara's word for it, because it gives sometimes more general clarity to us. So here is the pasuk again. The Aro Zachar, a male uncircumcised person, Asher Leimos Paralase, who doesn't give himself a circumcision. So here, look at the word Va'aro Zachar and look at Rashi. Because I referenced this on an earlier pasuk where Kan Limaid Shahamila Ba'isay Makom Shonika Barzachla Nekeva. Here is a textual proof, if you need that the circumcision is done somewhere that distinguishes between male and female. Asher Lo Yimo, that doesn't do a circumcision. Let's take a look at Rashi here, Dr. Hammer, because I think Rashi is sensitive to your question. Only once a person is in this state where they are able to be punished, then v'nichrasa.
Okay.
So we're talking about a person once they become a child. Interestingly enough, Rashi also adds Aval Aviv, Ein Anushal of Karis. A father might not get Karis, Aval Aviv Ba'aseh. So the consequence initially is for the father, and then when a person becomes an adult, then they have a responsibility. Now, again, this is I think we have to be clear that this is not an excuse or a right for someone who is privileged to have a circumcision sometime in the 8th day or approximately in the 8th day to go around judging someone who never knew about their heritage or never knew about a bris, or maybe they didn't even realize that they weren't circumcised because they didn't understand what it was and the parents never. So obviously all the appropriate caveats about sensitivity and shenishba, etc. But certainly if we know an adult who is open to the conversation, who didn't have the opportunity to have a bris, it would be a wonderful mitzvah if we would help them out and make it feasible. And and of course ultimately the person who decides to do so, I think it's a lot of credit, because that's not an easy procedure to voluntarily subject oneself to. Alan, you're muted, but we'd love to hear.
I just unmuted myself. I don't understand why an adult has to be circumcised on a Shabbos.
They are not circumcised on Shabbos. They are not to be circumcised on Shabbos.
No, okay.
Rabbi,
That straightens that out.
Rabbi.
Yes.
So one of the things that I'm always cognizant of, every generation thinks only we have these problems. I want to go back to the word zachar, and we know today what kind of conversation it could lead to. But if I remember correctly, in Moed Katan, there's all kinds of definitions, not because of Milah, I think because of marriage, of what is a zachar exactly. So they were aware of this problem, and we didn't exactly invent it in this crazy age.
Interesting. I'm gonna plead the fifth and move on to the Gemara. But it's certainly true that certain issues that we think are only contemporary have been to some extent or another enduring. And there's also an attempt to conflate one conversation with the other. And let's avoid a highly sensitive and a current conversation. Let's go back to our ancient Talmud tradition and see what other information we might get about on the topic. So let's jump back to the Gemara. And again, just to remind everyone, what we've done over here is one thing. In Pasuk 14, which talks about an adult, because that's the only person that's going to be getting a consequence, we use the word bris. And so let's say a person on their bar mitzvah day, they go to shul, they say Mazel Tov, and the rabbi says, son, on your bar mitzvah, now you become independently responsible to uphold all of the traditions that you and your ancestors have. And the son says, oi, does that mean that now I have to get a bris? And the rabbi says, oh, you didn't have a bris? Absolutely, we can take care of it for sure. Let's call the moil. It's Friday, let's say. The moil can come tomorrow. We do the bris tomorrow. And of course, the answer is no. But where we're holding in a thought process where we said bris, Shabbos is called a bris, circumcision is called a bris, and we could do a circumcision on Shabbos. Well, an untimely bris maybe could also be done on Shabbos. This is the Gemara's question. Here, how can you use the Gzera Shava bris? Gadol d'chsibe bris. L'tchei Shabbos, we should also push aside Shabbos. Rashi, Gadol, who's a Gadol ben Shalosh Esrei? 13 and up, they have a Mila Shalai Bismana. Suffice it to say, a 13-year-old is a little late for the bris. We have a verse. Again, this is just recapping what we looked at inside. The Aral Zachar Asher Lo Yimol as Brisi Hofer, a male who fails to circumcise, as Brisi Hofer, V'hai Krabe Gadol. Dr. Hammer, look carefully. This is also responding to your very appropriate question. This verse clearly is talking about an adult. And the fact that he has consequences, obviously we're talking about an adult, and maybe based on this we should push aside Shabbos. But we've already clearly stated, and we'll say again, that only a timely bris, only 8 days we push aside Shabbos, and other bris and do not do so.
Rabbi, so my obvious question is, what about a 12-year-old?
One second. On the power of this question, we can be certain that the Gzeira Shava that tells us that a bris is done on Shabbos is not from the word bris. Go ahead, Beryl. What was the question?
What do we do with a 12-year-old?
What do you mean, what do we do with a 12-year-old?
We said a gadol, so a 12-year-old, we could do it on Shabbos?
Of course not. That was not a Havamina. But we have a verse that describes the fact that when a 13-year-old, when a Jew becomes an adult, they now have an independent responsibility to do mitzvahs. So maybe on that day, they would become responsible to do it on Shabbos, because the word bris describes an adult, and the first time you become an adult is at 13 years and 1 day. That was the Gemara's question. The Gemara's answer, because the Gemara never really actually wanted us to give an adult a bris on Shabbos. The Gemara knows we don't give an adult a bris on Shabbos, and with that power, we reframe and we have to revise the source for the fact that a bris is done on Shabbos.
It's actually to the point that if it's a C-section, I think they don't do it on Shabbos because it's an ambiguity of the date of birth.
Maybe let's see. Asya, now we need to revise. We know here's what's going on. We know there's a Gzera Shava. Apparently, we didn't know which word was the matter of the Gzera Shava. So we started with ois and we said it cannot be ois. Then we went to bris and now we said it cannot be bris. Asya doiros. Maybe it's doiros. Where do we have the word doiros? Bris oilam. The Shabbos, it says that it should be an eternal covenant for all generations. And we read just before, you want to see that here? Oh, here. So we have doiros. And just like the doiros of Shabbos, well, the doiros of bris could also happen on Shabbos. When we read Rabbi Steinsaltz, we have a verbal analogy, Gzera Shava, between generations about Shabbos and generations about circumcision. Now the Gemara asks the same question. Hold on. Tzitzis. We've got the word doiros about tzitzis. And are we allowed to tie tzitzis strings on Shabbos? We wear tzitzis, but are we allowed to make tzitzis?
No.
It should be permitted to affix ritual fringes to a garment on Shabbos. We already discussed long ago, if you remember, that tzitzis and mezuzah, even according to Rabbi Eliezer, you don't do that on Shabbos. And we have the word dairais. Oh. And Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak now is going to revise the answer, and it's going to start to make sense. Dunin, Ice Bris Dairais, Ice Bris Dairais. There is a super alignment of common language exclusively by two mitzvahs. Ice, Bris, and Dairais. That pattern of words only exists in two places: Bris and Shabbos. So although it is true, Ice can be found by Tefillin. Bris can be found by, what was the mitzvah? An adult. Circumcision. Dairais can be found by tzitzis. So each word in isolation is not exclusive. We have a super pattern of words, Ice, Bris, and Dairais, which is exclusively present by Shabbos and Bris. Every other mitzvah which we thought to maybe compare do not have this super connection. And so we have a mega heavy duty Gzeira Shava, 3 different words, and this is not going to be challenged with much ease. And so just to back up, we knew there was a Gzeira Shava. We knew it was something about this sentence. We probe each word individually, and we said that can't be it. But in truth, it's all of them together. I think you'll all agree this is a very strong and fascinating exercise. Again, the Gemara doesn't always think through the whole process like this for us. But here we are privileged and lucky to really be able to go through in real time, or not in real time, but to go through and experience a conversation that unfolded in the Beis Medrash as we were trying to uncover the origin, at least according to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, that a bris can be done on Shabbos if it is bismano, if it is timely. Comments, questions, challenges? Who likes this Gemara? I found it to be very interesting and refreshing, especially once we got to the final punchline.
I just have one question.
Go ahead.
If a frum couple can't conceive, the woman can't conceive, and the doctors tell her that she really can't conceive, there's no way.
Okay.
They adopt a Christian baby that's maybe 2 months old.
Okay.
Does he get the circumcision right away?
So let's back up.
If
Let's
they
back up.
if
Hold
they
on.
promise to send him to Egypt?
So let's back up. First of all, it doesn't matter if the baby is Christian or any other kind of, as long as they're not Jewish. Second of all, the child that's adopted, and this is sensitive. I want to be very clear. It's a sensitive question, but I'm just going to tell you the facts as I understand them. A child who is adopted does not automatically, in Judaism, attain the Judaism status of the parents. An adopted child needs to undergo a conversion, and of course, if the household the child is adopted into is a Jewishly observant family, and especially and most importantly, the parents are committed to send the kid to the Jewish school, then the Beis Din will give the child a conversion, and the child will become Jewish, and then concurrent with the conversion, or as part of the conversion process, the child will receive a bris. But that bris, like any conversion bris, would not be docha, would not push aside Shabbos.
What is the conversion?
What do you mean, what is the conversion?
What do they do?
The child goes to the mikveh and gets a bris, and in front of a Beis Din goes through the conversion process. And then at the child's bar mitzvah, the Beis Din or representative of the Beis Din asks the child if he is comfortable accepting and on board with being Jewish, and then there's no turning back.
So I thought with a baby, for instance, you can't ask him if he's comfortable with it. So
You can't ask the infant.
They had their bris, and then I thought, from what I understand, when they're an adult or at a certain age, then they have to reaffirm
Bar mitzvah.
the bar mitzvah age.
Bar
They
mitzvah.
have to reaffirm
But the affirmation is just the fact that they're given the opportunity, if you will. And I was speaking to a person on a bezdin that does many conversions, and I asked them, so do you like tell the child, hey, are you sure you want to be Jewish? And it's not so. They just have a conversation about Yiddishkeit, no, about the person's Yiddishkeit. And so long as the responses are positive, that will be accepted as them affirming. So I'm sure maybe other bate didn't do it outright. They say, hey, young man, young woman, as you know, when you were a baby, you were adopted, you were converted, and we just want to make sure that you're fully on board now that you're an adult, halachically an adult. Now, the interesting thing, and this is obviously a very sensitive and delicate topic. Adoption is all around and very prevalent. But from a halachic perspective, it would be preferred for adoptive parents to let the child know that they're adopted. Now, people in mental health might agree or disagree, but I think generally speaking, it's better for a child to be given the truth than for them to uncover it and there's plenty of torment and hardship, and that could happen if a person isn't informed and they discover it on their own. So I think the consensus generally is that for a child's well-being, and also the parents concerned about, many times the parents don't want the child to know they're adopted because the child might feel less loved. Well, I think parents, if they make it clear in their speech and action that they love the child, and not only do they love them, but they chose that child to be their child, it could be a sign of deeper love. But also from a halachic perspective, it is certainly preferred that a child should know, should know about their status. And again, there needn't be any shame whatsoever. On the contrary, there's something very, very, very special, and especially today, where adoption is very prevalent and conversion is quite prevalent, and so there's no reason why there should be any real sense of shame. But it is important to know the halachic status. So, for example, and again, I know this too may be controversial, but if you're adopted by a family of Kohanim, so the person that's adopted doesn't have the Kohen status. The person's adopted by a Levite, they don't automatically have the Levite status, and those are things that are important. Now, it's great to be a Kohen, but as those who are Kohanim know, there are also complexities and downsides, and so it's always best for a person to know the full package of perks and responsibilities, without any surprises. So that's my sense. It's a highly sensitive topic, and of course, there's always a case-by-case consideration. But that would be the 1 minute crash course on the matter. Doctor, you were saying? Go ahead.
Rabbi?
Yes, doctor.
I totally agree with you about the having knowledge of being adopted. Very important. What I want to bring up is something else, which related to what you started today with, the beginning of the school year. Kids in Jewish day schools, particularly non-Orthodox, but even Orthodox day schools, but the conservative day schools for a long time have found that there's always in every class of newly admitted kids who are not halachically Jewish. And how they deal with that, different schools deal with that differently. But if they don't deal with that, and it's just left, up in the air, you have kids who are doing all the appropriate Jewish things in school and camps and everything, and often the non-Jewish father, I'm not talking about adopted, but non-Jewish father of a not in conservative reform, so comes to the quote temple on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur or whatever with the wife, and you don't know. So I think it's important, if you're involved in an organization or a school with kids, just to get them on the application for membership, to ask something which will get you to want to pursue whether or not, and then it's a very sensitive issue how you approach somebody who just paid you X thousands of dollars for the kid to go to your day camp or whatever to talk about that. But that's another story.
And just to reframe that, it's always easier to be upfront, than to have to try to, And so I have a friend who, because we started over COVID having a lot of young, programs for young professionals. These are young kids, the 20s and 30s, and it's about Jewish community, but it's also to find their bashert. And so this friend was saying that, it's a Jewish young professionals, but occasionally a non-Jewish person or a person that halachically has a different status goes in the group. And he always tries to immediately have a conversation with them so that it doesn't become awkward when they want to get married and the rabbi says, I can't marry you. Better to be upfront, and they should know that upfront, than to have the person get involved and, let's say, become a supporter and feel fully entitled to all the perks and privileges. And then the rabbi's halachic, his smicha compels him to follow halacha, and then he has to, disappoint the person. So better to lose a friend than to have to hurt a person, while, deep into a relationship.
Just
So
one correction, because I misspoke. I focused on the father coming to shul. It's the mother